Welcome back to Books and Ideas. I'm your host, Dr. Ginger Campbell. Today, I am going to be talking with historian Lillian Faderman about her most recent book, Harvey Milk, His Lives and Death. Harvey Milk was the first openly gay man elected to public office, and unfortunately, he was assassinated in 1978, less than a year after he took office. We're going to explore why Milk remains an important person in LGBT history. Now, some of you may realize that this interview was actually released earlier this year as an episode of my new show, Grain Rainbows. It was episode 14. The reason that I am releasing this as an episode of Books and Ideas is that I think that Milk's story is relevant beyond just the LGBT community. And I hope that that will become clear to you as we are talking. You can find complete show notes as well as all the other episodes of Books and Ideas at booksandideas.com. You can also send me feedback at docartemis@gmail.com or voice feedback at speakpipe.com/docartemis. I'll be back after the interview to discuss a few highlights of the episode, as well as a few announcements. My guest today is historian and writer Lillian Faderman. It's an honor to have you on Books and Ideas.
Thank you, Ginger. I'm happy to be here.
So, do you mind, Lillian, starting out just by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I have been writing since, the 1960s. I published a co-edited book in 1969 called Speaking for Ourselves, American Ethnic Writing, because I had just gotten my PhD at UCLA, and what I learned going through the program, largely in American literature and American culture, was there was no minority representation at all. And so I thought that that was a huge loss, and I wanted to bring minority representation into the canon. Speaking for Ourselves was the first multi-ethnic book of literature available to college students. And of course, what I was doing is I was very interested in ethnic literature, but I was also interested in minority voices that had nothing to do with ethnic or racial difference. But at that time, in 1969, when the book came out, and I actually started it in 1967, as soon as I finished my dissertation, you just couldn't write about gay stuff. No publisher would publish anything about gay literature. And so I thought I would approach the whole idea of difference from the point of view of ethnic and racial minorities. But when I finally saw that you could write about gay literature and gay history and lesbian and gay people, as we finally called that community in the 1970s, then I started doing research on lesbian history and lesbian literature. I published my first articles in 1976, and I expanded that into a book called Surpassing the Love of Men, Romantic Friendship and Love Between Women. That came out in 1981. And that sort of launched a whole new career for me. I continued to be a professor, but I also continued to write, first about lesbian history and lesbian literature. I did Odd Girls and Twilight Lovers in 1991, and a number of books in between and after. And then I expanded my interest to include the LGBT community. So in 2006, I did a book with a co-author, a gay man, called Gay LA, which was about the history of gay life in Los Angeles, or LGBT life, as we would say now. And then I decided I wanted to expand even further. And so I did a huge book that came out in 2015 that was the history of the struggle of the LGBTQ movement called when it began the gay movement. And so my book is called The Gay Revolution, The Story of the Struggle. And then I was asked by Yale University Press if I would be interested in doing a biography of Harvey Milk for the Jewish Lives series. And I had done a lot of work on Harvey Milk for the Gay Revolution, and of course I was interested. So that was my most recent book that came out just this past year, called Harvey Milk, His Lives and Death.
So that's what we're going to focus on today, this latest book. Was it hard making the transition to writing your first biography?
No, I had actually written a memoir about myself, and then I wrote a reconstructed memoir about my mother, and writing about my mother was sort of like writing a biography. Of course, I didn't have the advantage of newspaper articles. She wasn't a public figure at all. I didn't have the advantage of speeches that she gave. I didn't have the advantage of many people who had known her in her youth. So that was what I had to do when I wrote about Harvey Milk. I had to find out who was still alive, who knew him at various stages of his life. I found wonderful archival material, like letters that he had written even when he was in his 20s. That was really exciting to discover. I found many, many newspaper articles about him during his lifetime. I found many speeches that he gave and many editorials that he himself wrote. And so there was just a wealth of material that I could discover. Some of it never tapped before. There was an excellent biography of Harvey Milk that was published in 1982 by Randy Shilts, called The Mayor of Castro Street. But in Randy Shilts' biography, of course, he couldn't know what would happen with Harvey Milk. He couldn't know that he would become perhaps the most important historical figure. I think if you ask most people to name just one gay hero of the past, one major gay figure of the past, even if they know nothing about LGBT history, they would probably name Harvey Milk because he has become so important historically. He has certainly been a gay martyr, but he's now an American icon. In fact, I discovered in the course of my research that in 1999, Time magazine had a list of the 100 most influential individuals of the 20th century, not just in America, but all over the world. And Harvey Milk was the only gay person, the only out gay person, I should say, on that list. And he was in a section called Heroes and Icons, and he he was in that section together with people like Anne Frank and the Kennedys, the Kennedy family, and Che Guevara, and Charles Lindbergh, and Mother Teresa. He would have loved that last one, I think. But, you know, my point is that even for young people who know so little about LGBT history, or just readers in general, or the civilization in general, if you do ask them to name one figure who was gay, who was out and gay, and has done important things for the country, I think that one figure that they would be able to name would be Harvey Milk. There are many others who certainly could and should be named, but more people are familiar with Harvey Milk than with any of these other wonderful figures.
Just for the sake of the listener who perhaps can't remember who Harvey Milk was, give me your little elevator speech about why he was important before we get into the details.
So Harvey Milk was a fascinating character. He had many lives, as I suggest in the subtitle of Harvey Milk, His Lives and Death. He didn't become a politician until 19 73, and he was killed just 5 years later. So his political career was very, very brief, even briefer than that, those dates that I just suggested, because he ran for political office the first time in 1973. He ran for the San Francisco Board of Supervisors. He had just arrived in San Francisco the year before. He couldn't even get the support of San Francisco's gay political organization called the Alice B. Toklas Memorial Democratic Club, because they said to him, you're an unknown. Nobody knows you. And what have you done for the gay community? Why should we support you? And so they wouldn't. But he ran for public office anyway. He did get the support of not the organized gay community, but many, many gay people. And he also got the support of many ethnic and racial minorities, because he really believed in fighting against discrimination no matter who it targeted, not only gay people, but Latinos and black people and Asians and the elderly and people with disabilities. And so he was able to make coalitions with all of those communities. So he'd been a complete unknown the first time he ran for office, 1973. And he didn't win, but the first time around he got 17,000 votes, which was pretty good for an unknown. He decided he would run again. He ran in 1975. And this time he got many, many more than the 17,000 votes. He actually appealed to people all over San Francisco, and there were 6 vacancies on the Board of Supervisors, and this time he came in 7th. So he got very close to winning. He ran again in 1976. There was a vacancy for an assembly seat from an assembly district in which he lived, the California State Assembly. He ran for that. He didn't realize when he decided he would run that his competition was Art Agnos, who was supported by not only George Moscone, the mayor of San Francisco, but all of the leading Democratic lights in California, such as Willie Brown and Phil and John Burton, who were major liberal politicians at the time, and Leo McCarthy, who was the head of the assembly. So I think Harvey didn't know what he was getting into when he ran against Art Agnos for that assembly seat. And of course he lost to Agnos, but by then he had such name recognition in San Francisco. And in 1977, when it was time to elect new people to the Board of Supervisors, by that time, San Francisco had changed from general elections to all of San Francisco to district elections. And so Harvey Milk had to appeal only to people in his district, which included not only the Castro area, which was very gay, but other areas which were very liberal, such as the Haight-Ashbury district and Noe Valley. This time he won by a landslide. He had no trouble winning. And so he was sworn into office in January 1978. He did astonishing things in his first 11 months in office, and that was the end of it. He was killed in November 1978 by Dan White, who assassinated not only Harvey, but also George Moscone, the mayor. But in those 11 months, he really put gay on the map, or he was certainly a huge cause for putting gay on the map. And of course, his dramatic death by assassination made headlines all over the country, and that became very important for the gay community. Harvey Milk was martyred because he was gay. People all over America, not only the people in the gay community, but people in general, saw for the first time that you could be gay and you could be a very credible politician. They saw how much he was loved in San Francisco, not just by the gay community, but by liberals all over San Francisco, and certainly by other minority groups in San Francisco. They saw that you could be gay and you could be a very charismatic political figure that would have huge impact. What they saw through the martyrdom of Harvey Milk also made it possible not only for more gay people who were out to consider running for public office, and they started to run for public office right after Harvey's assassination, but I think it also made it possible for straight people all over the country to see that, yes, I could vote for a gay person. Why not? Harvey Milk really was an important pioneer in that way. And now, of course, we have a couple of hundred out LGBTQ people in public office, elected to public office all over the country. But Harvey Milk was a pioneer. He wasn't the first LGBTQ person, not a term that was used in the 70s, but he wasn't the first out gay person to be elected to public office. The first out gay people were two women who called themselves lesbians in the 1970s. Elaine Noble was elected to the Assembly in Massachusetts in 1974, and Kathy Kozachenko was elected to the city council in Ann Arbor, Michigan, also in 1974. But Harvey was the first gay man to be elected to public office. And of course, his assassination, as I suggested, meant that people all over America knew that there had been a gay person in public office, an elected public office, as they didn't necessarily know with Elaine Noble or Kathy Kozachenko.
So Harvey Milk was born in 1930. How did that shape the man that he became?
I think it shaped him in so many ways. I wrote this book for the Yale Jewish Lives series, and so I became particularly interested in Harvey's upbringing. He was born into a Jewish family on Long Island, which, as I discovered, had been a stronghold of the Ku Klux Klan in the 1920s and even into the 1930s. That was so incredible to me. I knew that the Klan had a presence outside of the South, but I didn't realize it had a presence in New York, and it did in the 1920s and 1930s. Very much against black people, very much against Jews, very much against immigrants in general. And when he was born, his parents, who lived on Long Island, were certainly very aware of the fact that they were right next door virtually to Ku Klux Klan members and Ku Klux Klan rallies. And then, of course, in the 1930s, there was the rise of fascism in Europe, the rise of anti-Semitism in particular in Europe and also in the United States. On Long Island, again, there was something called the German-American Bund, which was a Nazi organization patterned very much after Nazi organizations in Germany, very much venerating Adolf Hitler. And they had major rallies on Long Island, and Harvey grew up being aware of those things. He was also very aware when he was 13 of the defeat of the Warsaw Ghetto in Poland. His parents, he said much later that his parents had told him about the defeat of the Jews of the Warsaw Ghetto, who fought back against the Nazis for as long as they could. His parents said they knew that it was a losing proposition. There was no way that the people inside that ghetto would win against the Nazi troops that had attacked them. But his parents said, if something so evil descends on the world, you have no choice. You have to fight. You have to fight to your dying breath. And I think Harvey always remembered that. I'm not comparing discrimination against gay people in the 1960s and 1970s with what was going on in Nazi Europe, but there was certainly virulent discrimination, and Harvey was determined to fight back to his dying breath. And that was what he did, in effect. He did fight back to his dying breath.
By the end of his life, Harvey Milk was arguing forcefully that gay people should come out of the closet so that their fellow citizens would not only realize that they existed, but that they were people, not that different from themselves. But he didn't start out with that opinion. Can you tell us about how and why his attitude evolved over his lifetime?
What I discovered was quite astonishing to me, and I'm sure it will be astonishing to my readers too. In 1964, when ultra-conservative Barry Goldwater ran for president of the United States, Harvey Milk was working on Wall Street, and he was a Goldwater supporter. He would even get up early and go to the subway stations before work and hand out leaflets saying, "Vote for Barry Goldwater," and he would talk about all the reasons why. What I discovered, too, though, is that in 1964, there was no such word as libertarian, but Goldwater was certainly a libertarian in that he believed that the government had no business in people's bedrooms. And that's what attracted Harvey Milk to Barry Goldwater. I think Harvey was very much a libertarian. I think he bought a little more of Goldwater's message in 1964. Remember, I gave the subtitle to my book, His Lives and Death. And one of his lives is that he worked on Wall Street. He was a securities analyst on Wall Street in 1964. So it really took something of an evolution, a slow evolution. He met a young man who was a hippie and was into theater. Later in the 1960s, Harvey became very interested in little theater, even thought of himself for a while as an actor and a producer. And then he became a hippie, and as a hippie, his political ideas altered from what they had been in 1964. So it was kind of a long road to understanding himself as a liberal. He was very much closeted when he worked on Wall Street. He had to be on Wall Street in the 1960s. Once he became a hippie and once he became involved in theater, he was not so closeted. But one reason he promulgated his message about how important it was for gay people to come out to their parents in particular, but not just their parents, to everyone in their family, to their neighbors, to their friends, to people where they work. He even said you have to come out to the wait staff in the restaurants where you eat and to the clerks in the supermarket where you shop. You have to come out to everyone. They have to see how diverse we are. They have to see how they know gay people of all stripes, and they have to know that they know that. So his message was very powerful, but he did not come out to his parents. His brother knew he was gay, but his parents didn't know, and I think he always regretted it.
I'm going to interrupt here for just a minute to remind you that I need your help in reaching more listeners. I hope you will share Books and Ideas with your friends and on social media. Reviews in iTunes are particularly powerful. If you send a screenshot of your iTunes review to docartemis@gmail.com, I'll send you an Amazon gift card. Now let's get back to our conversation with Lillian Faderman.
He was very much alienated from his father because he could never tell his father that he was gay, and that was very painful to him. And his mother died in 1962. His mother probably knew he was gay. I tell this great story, I think, in the book about how he was living with a young man by the name of Joe Campbell before his mother died. And his mother just loved Joe, and she liked to knit, and she knitted for Harvey and Joe matching Afghans. So what kind of message is that? I mean, it's really saying that she knows that they're a couple, that they're living together. But he could never bring himself to say those words before her death in 1962. He realized that they lost something and he lost something in his inability to be honest with them. And I think it was at least partly for that reason that he came to understand that this was painful, that gay people shouldn't have to go through that. You shouldn't have to be in the closet with your loved ones. And then, of course, on top of that was his realization that if we're asking for first-class citizenship, we can't do that from the closet. We have to all be out. And he was right. He wasn't the first person to say that, but he was the first person to say that from political office, that it's absolutely vital that all gay people, or as we would say nowadays, all LGBTQ plus people have to be out, so everyone can realize that we are the people that they know and love. We're not these weirdos who lurk in the shadows ready to pounce on some 14-year-old kid. We're your sons and daughters. We're your neighbors. We're the buddies that you have at work. And that's a very important message that the straight community understand.
So this principle was, I think, really important when it came to the events around Anita Bryant. So could you take us back to Harvey's part in that story? Because I think it was a very important, he wasn't in office very long, but he did some really important things in his short time.
Absolutely, he did. So, as some of your listeners may remember and others may not remember or may not have even heard of, Anita Bryant was a very famous pop singer in the 1970s. She was also famous for doing these orange juice commercials that were constantly on television, and she was a religious fundamentalist, and she lived in Florida. In 1977, Miami-Dade County in Florida had passed an ordinance that was very simple. It added to the existing non-discrimination ordinance that prohibited discrimination against people on account of race or religion or place of origin or sex. It just added to that ordinance the word sexual or affectional preference. Just those 4 words to an existing ordinance. The Miami-Dade Council passed that ordinance without any problem, and Anita Bryant and other religious fundamentalists got wind of it, and they were very upset. They decided that they would get enough signatures to put that ordinance on the ballot for repeal. And they won. That June in 1977, Miami-Dade County voters voted to repeal the ordinance by a vote of 2-1. And it started to spread all over the country. Anita Bryant began an organization that she called Save Our Children, and the whole idea was that homosexuals were so terrible that all they wanted to do was seduce kids, and we had to, quote, save our children from the homosexual menace, unquote. So she spread her venom everywhere. St. Paul, Minnesota had an ordinance that protected gay people from discrimination. Again, it was just added to the ordinance that protected ethnic minorities and women and people with disabilities. Sexual and affectional preference was added to their ordinance. With the help of Anita Bryant, that ordinance was repealed, again 2-1. Wichita, Kansas had just passed an ordinance that protected gay people. With her help, that ordinance was repealed 5-1. Eugene, Oregon had an ordinance that protected gay people. That ordinance was repealed 2-1. And then there was a very conservative state senator in California by the name of John Briggs, who decided that he wanted to run for governor, and what better way to do it than to get on the ballot something that was anti-homosexual. And what he got on the ballot, and he thought that what people feared the most was homosexuals teaching their children in the public schools. And so what he got on the ballot was this proposition that would have prohibited anyone who was gay or lesbian, or anyone who even said anything nice about gays and lesbians, prohibited them from working in the public schools in any capacity at all. Harvey Milk became the most important figure in the forefront of fighting against the Briggs Initiative. It wouldn't have been defeated by Harvey Milk alone, certainly. Gay people in San Francisco, with Harvey in the forefront of that, organized, but his group wasn't the only one. There were conservative gays who had groups that fought against the ordinance. There were radical gays who had groups that fought against the ordinance. But I think he managed to pull many of those groups together, and he became the face of the anti-Briggs Initiative because he was the most famous gay person in California at that time. And the Briggs Initiative was indeed defeated against all predictions. It went down to resounding defeat. And I think Harvey Milk was very important in helping the Briggs Initiative be defeated in 1978.
It's just hard to imagine what would have happened, if a state like California had passed that initiative.
I think what we realized, and I'm in California too, and I think what we realized is that if that initiative had passed in California, that would be the end of any kind of movement for gay rights, because California is such a big state, and Anita Bryant had gotten such momentum in Miami-Dade County and St. Paul, Minnesota, and Wichita, Kansas, Eugene, Oregon, and if California had continued her momentum, that would have been the end of it for us. And so it was so important that the Briggs Initiative be defeated. And that was the beginning of the end for Anita Bryant and for all of these anti-gay initiatives that were cropping up, and initiatives to repeal what little rights we had in the 1970s. But that was virtually the end of it, which is not to say that was the end of homophobia. Of course, the right tried to take away our rights for decades after and would still love to do that. But that was certainly the end of those initiatives that appeared on the ballot in the 1970s.
I want to emphasize the fact that, like you said, he did not defeat this initiative on his own, but when the fight started, it looked like the proposition was going to pass and that fighting against it was hopeless.
Right. There were polls once the Briggs Initiative qualified for the California ballot, and it was just clear that it was going to win by a landslide because voters had believed they drank the Kool-Aid, as we say now. They had believed all the terrible things about gay people. They believed it in Miami-Dade, they believed it in St. Paul, they believed it in Wichita, and they were perfectly willing to believe it here. And so what it took, I think, was this organized battle against those beliefs. And Harvey had the right idea. He was willing to debate John Briggs on television. He was willing to appear at these where he was totally out. He wasn't the only one that did it, of course, and I want to emphasize that. It was really a concerted effort up and down California to defeat the Briggs Initiative. But, as I say, he was so much the face of it, and I think the media so often came to him because he was the top-out gay politician in the 1970s, and so he became virtually the big spokesman against the Briggs Initiative.
Can you think of any other examples of important moments that we might want to highlight while we're talking?
Yes. I think as soon as Harvey got on the Board of Supervisors, he was really determined to make a difference, and he did make a difference. He passed at a time when gay rights ordinances were being repealed around the country. He got the San Francisco Board of Supervisors to pass the strongest gay rights ordinance ever. That one really had teeth in it. That one made provisions for gay people, if they were discriminated against, to sue those who discriminated against them. And that became a model ordinance for gay rights at a time when we were losing everywhere in the country, when our rights were being reversed. So I think Harvey Milk gave gay activists everywhere the courage to continue pushing our rights through local government and state government as well. But he did other things. He was in the forefront of getting San Francisco to divest from South Africa. This was a time when South Africa still had apartheid, and Harvey Milk got the Board of Supervisors to vote to say that San Francisco should not do business with South Africa, and any corporation in San Francisco or any bank in San Francisco should not do business with South Africa until they ended their policy of apartheid. Harvey Milk was killed soon after he got San Francisco to pass that resolution, but San Francisco was the first city that had such a policy of not doing business with South Africa because of its apartheid. By the 1990s, when apartheid was finally over, well over 100 cities and counties around the United States had a policy like that, but it was Harvey who had such foresight that he made San Francisco the first and the model city to adopt such a policy. He did other things that were important in the short time he was in public office. He was very much in favor of rent control, and that was because he was concerned about the elderly who were on a fixed income, and so he fought for rent control. He was very much in favor of ecology, and so he fought against the expansion of the San Francisco airport. He said it would mean more noise and more pollution and more people in San Francisco, and he wanted to keep San Francisco small and beautiful. Of course, it was a losing battle, as we know now, but know that in the 1970s. It's really ironic that San Francisco has now named a terminal after him, the Harvey Milk Terminal, because he was so set on keeping the airport from expanding. He really thought that San Franciscans' taxes, the money that the city and the county of San Francisco collected in taxes, should not go towards things like hiring vice squad officers to pursue people in victimless crimes. In those days, vice squad officers would arrest people on the street if they thought that they were gay, or they would entrap gay men in gay bars of San Francisco. He thought that the money had to stop going for things like that and had to go to things like Operation Bootstrap, which would help young people and minorities start their own businesses. Or he said that money that's wasted on the Vice Squad should go towards giving the indigent elderly in San Francisco dental care. That would be a good use of the money that people paid in their taxes to the city and the county. So he was very progressive, very forward-looking in the battles that he brought to the Board of Supervisors. The tragedy, of course, is that he was only there for 11 months before he was assassinated.
Yeah, reading your book, I found myself having one of those what-if moments.
Yes. And I think so many people that I interviewed for the book did. He died, for instance, before the AIDS epidemic took hold. And so many people that I interviewed told me that Harvey would have known how to fight the federal government until they put more money into research. Harvey would have known how to make sure there were programs so that young people would understand about safe sex, as they didn't sufficiently for so long. He would have known how to put tax dollars in the right place to help fight AIDS so that we could have found a cure long before so many thousands of people were killed by AIDS.
He could have also been a victim.
Yes, of course he could have. And I end by talking about that so many people that he knew and loved were victimized by the epidemic and did die of AIDS. And I think he may well have gotten AIDS himself. What I speculate about in the book is that I think he would have hated to have died of AIDS, of course, and he would have hated to have been killed at such a young age. He was only 48. But I think he would have loved it, that he really, in his memory, so much has been done for the LGBT movement that he's become not only our martyr, he's our Martin Luther King, he's our Malcolm X, he's in some ways even our John F. Kennedy, but he's also an American icon. I think his name, his reputation has gone so far beyond the gay community. And I think evidence of it is not only the fact that he was named to that Time magazine list of the 100 most influential individuals of the 20th century, but also that his image is on a stamp that the post office issued a few years ago. A ship is being built by the U.S. Navy called the USN Harvey Milk. I think he would have absolutely loved that. He had been in the Navy, very closeted himself in the Navy during the Korean War in 1951, but people will be on that ship and realize that it's named after someone who did such good, who was an out gay politician. In 2009, President Obama awarded him the Presidential Medal of Freedom, posthumously, of course. It's the highest honor that a civilian could get. And so he's been so recognized since his death. And I think he would have liked that. I think he would have loved the two films that were made about him. There was a documentary in the 1980s about him. And of course, in 2008, the wonderful film starring Sean Penn that was about Harvey Milk. I think he would have loved all of that.
Yeah, his personality of loving the spotlight also comes through in your book. And I want to tell you that I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. I think any successful politician has to love the spotlight. There has to be an ego there if you're going to go through all of the pain and difficulties of running for office. And Harvey Milk loved the spotlight since he was a little kid. His brother told the story of how when Harvey was 9 or 10 years old, he used to love to go to the Woodmere movie theater on Long Island for the kids' matinee, and the reason he loved it was not because he loved the movies, but he loved that the manager of the theater would have a raffle before the matinee, and if you had a winning ticket, it wasn't the Hopalong Cassidy wristwatch or whatever that he loved so much. It was that the manager would call the winners up to get their prize, and when Harvey won, he knew he'd get to run up on stage to applause, and he'd get to bow and to mug, and that's what he really loved. And I think that was Harvey for his whole life. That might have been the driving impulse that made him run for office, but it was this instinct also that he wanted to do good, that he wanted to help the gay community, that he wanted to help all those who were discriminated against. I think that was his great value for America in public office.
Yeah, and that's what makes him an American icon, is the fact that he really embodies what we think of as what an American should be like. I don't want us to lose that.
Yes, and I think that we need more heroes like that, especially in times like these. We need to remember what Harvey Milk stood for. I hope there'll be many more young politicians who will model themselves on what Harvey Milk stood for.
Yeah, and one of the other things you bring out so well in the book is how good he was at building coalitions and listening to the various constituencies. He couldn't have gotten elected with only the gay vote. He had to go out there and talk to everybody and find out what the other people needed, and he did that. He really set an example of how politics ought to work.
Yes, and I think that's exactly right. He knew how to talk to these diverse communities, and it was always sincere. He knew how to talk to labor, for instance, and he got the endorsement of labor unions as an out gay man. He got the endorsement of these, what was certainly in the 1970s, these very macho construction unions and longshoremen's unions, because he knew what they needed, and he was willing to fight for their rights. He told them that, and I think that they loved him. He got the endorsement of the firefighters union because he bothered to find out what their gripes were, and he understood how he could help them find how to remedy those gripes. So he was really very much in tune with these diverse groups, and I think he was determined to fight for them. So he really is a wonderful model of what progressive politicians should be like.
Well, I hope that this will help the book reach more readers, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me.
Good to talk to you, Ginger. Thank you for inviting me on your show.
If you enjoy biographies, and especially if you enjoy learning history via biography, Harvey Milk, His Lives and Death by Lillian Faderman is a book you should read. When I finished reading it, I was left with a wide variety of emotions, including both sadness and appreciation. But I also felt an overwhelming sense of what if. In the span of a few short years, Harvey Milk became an effective leader who understood how to listen to varying viewpoints and how to get things done within our complex political system. One can't help but wonder what he might have accomplished if his life had not been cut short. Some may argue that in death, he became more powerful as a martyr. But after reading Faderman's biography, I feel that the LGBT community lost a lot more than it gained. Although Milk ran for office as an openly gay man and he fought for gay rights, he was able to get elected because he appealed to the concerns of other groups, including working class folks like firemen. He also fought for issues like environmental protection. Of course, his career was so short that his legacy remains largely in the arena of LGBT rights, including helping to defeat California Proposition 6, which would have required the firing of gay teachers. This was a proposition that was triggered by Anita Bryant's efforts in Florida. The importance of this cannot be overestimated because if this proposition had passed in California, the discrimination it represented likely would have spread to many more states. Before I close, I want to encourage you to send me feedback at docartemis@gmail.com or voicemail at speakpipe.com/docartemis. You can also post comments on the Books and Ideas Facebook fan page. And don't forget, if you send me a screenshot of your iTunes review, I will send you an Amazon gift card. On a personal note, I want to just tell you about something that's coming in the future. I'm in the midst of becoming a certified professional coach. And I'll be talking more about this in the future as to exactly what it means. But if you are interested in learning more, please either drop me an email or visit my main website at virginiacampbellmd.com. I'm going to be adding a page about coaching soon. But for now, I just want to make you aware of it because I know there's a time lag in when people listen to episodes. I anticipate that I will begin accepting clients in November of 2019. Meanwhile, I'm going to be back with the next episode of Books and Ideas on the 15th of next month. In the meantime, I hope you will check out my other podcasts, Brain Science and Graying Rainbows. Thanks again for listening. Books and Ideas is copyright 2019 to Virginia Campbell, MD. You can copy this show to share it with others, but for any other uses or derivatives, please contact me at docartemis@gmail.com. Theme music for Books and Ideas is The Open Door by Beatnik Turtle. Please visit their website at beatnikturtle.com.